Hi there. This is just a audio recording of the first week readings out of chapter 1. There's only 2 pages, so this should be pretty short. So let's begin. Chapter 1 Introductions. What is it to live honorably or rightly? We'll consider lots more questions before our study of ethics is done, but they will all be rooted in Socrates' basic concern. What's the basic concern? The really important thing is not to live, but to live well. And to live well means the same thing as to live honorably or rightly. And that was out of Socrates, Plato's work, Crito. Okay, so ethics is one branch of philosophy. There are others. In epistemology, philosophers investigate issues about the nature and extent of human knowledge and rational belief. Do we know anything at all? What is it to know rather than merely believe that something is true? How and to what extent can we gain knowledge? In metaphysics, philosophers investigate the fundamental nature of reality. Does reality contain non-physical or spiritual things as well as physical ones? Is there a God? Do we have non-physical minds that might survive the destruction of our bodies? Does the world, in addition to containing objective facts about what is the case, also contain objective facts about what ought to be the case? In logic, philosophers investigate the nature of reasoning and, in particular, how the truth of some claims can support or fail to support that of others. Consider these claims. Claim 1. There is a finite distance between the tip of the arrow and the target. Claim 2. To cross that finite distance, the tip of the arrow first has to cross half of it. And before crossing that half, it has to cross half of that, and so on and so forth on in an infinite number of times. Does the obvious truth of these two claims support the truth of this one? Which is the third claim. The arrow will never reach the target, as it will always have to cross another distance to cross before getting there. If 1 or 2 are true, which is to say, if these two claims are true, but 3 is false, where does the reasoning go wrong and why? Which is to say, if you object to this third claim, but the first 2 claims are true, where has our reasoning gone wrong? And that's the purpose of logic, to evaluate claims like that. So, philosophy covers a lot of intellectual ground. In fact, the word philosophy comes from the Greek for lover of wisdom. Philosophy is a search for reasoned answers to important, non-empirical questions about the nature and meaning of life. Each of these qualifiers is important. Philosophers don't value opinions or mere guesses. They want answers based on good reasons. And philosophers try not to waste time on questions that aren't of fundamental importance. Finally, philosophers are not trained to answer empirical questions. That's the job of scientists, psychologists, and so forth. Instead, philosophers focus on questions that can't be answered by science or any other empirical discipline. Our concern here is not with philosophy in general, but with ethics and Socrates' question. What is it to live rightly? Philosophers have responded to this question in 3 different ways. Some philosophers have focused on, next page, various assumptions behind the question. For example, Socrates seems to assume both that his question has a correct answer and that we're capable of discovering it. Yet, perhaps there is no special way or set ways in which we ought to live. There are just lots of different ways to live, each one of which is just as good, just as appropriate as any other. And even if there is one particular way in which we ought to live our lives, how are we to discover it? Is it revealed to us by God? Taught to us by others? And then how do we know that they know it? Found through our own experiences of the world? Socrates' concern also rests on a further assumption. We have some control over our lives. After all, there is no point in asking how the moon should orbit the Earth. It has no choice in the matter. What makes Socrates think that we have a choice in how we live our lives? Perhaps our lives are already determined, like the orbit of the moon. As the philosopher Baron von Holbach puts it, man's life is a line that nature commands him to describe upon the surface of the earth, without his ever being able to swerve from it, even for an instant, much in the same way the moon circles the earth. So, Like so much of philosophy, answering Socrates' question leads to other background questions, and many philosophers working in ethics are concerned with these fundamental issues. Other philosophers respond to Socrates' question by implicitly accepting his background assumptions and proceeding to develop general theories of the right way to live. These theories are composed of the fundamental principles that explain why some ways of living are better than others. Their suggestions are many and varied. We should live so as to best promote our own interests. We should live so as to best promote the good of all. We should live so as to develop and display certain virtues, such as courage, justice, honesty, charity. The list goes on. Still, other philosophers take Socrates' question to heart with regard to particular areas of activity. Instead of attempting to formulate an answer that generalizes over all cases, these philosophers focus on particular issues. How should we live when it comes to the environment? Or when it comes to caring for seriously ill, might euthanasia ever be appropriate? How should we live when it comes to meeting threats to our safety? Does the sort of life for which Socrates is searching have any room in it for torture, if it's necessary to save innocent lives? We'll examine some of the best and most challenging proposals that philosophers have made in all three of these areas of ethics. We'll consider debates over foundational assumptions behind Socrates' questions. We'll examine some of the general theories that try to answer it. And we'll see how philosophers answer Socrates' question with regard to such particular topics such as the environment, abortion, famine relief, and torture. Philosophy is personal. We all answer Socrates' question somewhat differently, yet there is more here to unite us than divide us. We are bound together by the question itself. None of us gets out of this life without answering it. Even refusing to consider the question is a way of answering it. Socrates' challenge to his audience in ancient Greece and to us today is to answer it on the basis of our common humanity, our common ability to reason using a process of argument to sift through the different options and find the ones we've the best reasons to think are true. The readings here are a chance to do just that. Engage with the philosophers in this text. Read their essays carefully, evaluate the proposals, and looking for good reasons to accept or reject them, and to form your own beliefs out of your evaluation of theirs. This process of rational discussion and argument in response to questions like Socrates is how we develop ourselves as beings.